So then the parole board member asked me, so how do you view going to jail? And I thought about it for a second. I said, you know what? Overwhelmingly, it was a positive thing. And they didn't really like that. Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm Slava P, and I'm here to tell you about another part of my jail experience. I went to jail for 28 months for a nonviolent drug crime. You can read all about why in my book, Bad Trips, which I will include a link to in the description of this video. But today I'm going to be talking to you about the most important part of going to jail, and that is getting out of jail by getting parole. During my time incarcerated, I saw a lot of people get parole who deserved it, some people who got it who didn't deserve it, and a lot of people who didn't get parole at all. So today I'm going to be talking to you about what you should know before you go up in front of the parole board. Keep in mind, all of this takes place within Canada, so it will not apply if you're in America or any other country in the world. But if you're Canadian and you're about to go to jail, listen up, because the advice I give you right now might help you out. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you're in minimum security when you're going up for parole, your chances are very high that you're going to be getting it. Minimum security is reserved for people who committed nonviolent drug crimes or crimes of passion. So you're not going to find a lot of assassins or serial killers in minimum security to begin with, and those people are probably not going to get parole. In fact, outside of one or two cases, I didn't see anyone get denied parole from a minimum security prison who wasn't a lifer. A lifer is somebody who's serving a life sentence. So there's two things to remember. There's the things to remember to do before you go up in front of the parole board, and the things to remember to do when you're actually in front of them, or in my case, on a video call with them. Thank you, COVID. So depending on your charge, you will find out whether or not you have to do a program. Now there's three types of programs. There's a high intensity program, a medium intensity program, and a maintenance program. You'll find out which track you're suited for when you get to Joyceville Assessment Unit or any assessment unit you're going into in your province. You'll meet with your parole officer, they'll assess your risk, and they will tell you what you need to do in order to be rehabilitated in the eyes of the government and the criminal justice system. Now, what do you do in these programs? You pretty much just talk. You figure out how to measure things like consequences and risks, and a lot of the things that most people already know but might not act on for whatever reason. You'll learn a lot of acronyms, you'll do some kind of bullshit homework that involves you going home and writing about how you feel about something on a piece of paper. But pretty much programs are just meant so that the government can say that, you know what, we tried, and it just didn't take. Or maybe it did. Maybe a program changed someone's life. I know that from talking to my parole officer, who has been working in this job for the past, 20 years. He said he's only heard of one case of someone who was on parole coming to him and saying, you know what, I was going to do something bad, but then I didn't because I remembered my program skills. Make of that anecdote whatever you will. 25 years, one case. I guess he's had more luck than the Toronto Maple Leafs. So a high intensity program takes 6 months. A medium intensity program takes 3 months. And then there's also a maintenance program that they put you in when they feel like you need a quick tune-up or a refresher on your attitude. And that could be anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. Not every institution will offer a high intensity program. In fact, I don't think any minimum security institutions offer a high intensity program. So I can't personally speak to the results of that. But I have seen a lot of people go through the medium or medium intensity programs. I have helped people with their homework, and I can tell you that it's not very hard. It's really just a matter of showing up, sitting in class, not falling asleep, and having a good attitude. Or at least not a bad attitude. Maintenance is the same thing, except for less amount of time. So if you find yourself in a maintenance program because your parole officer put you in one, do not stress. They're not very hard, but it does mean that there's something about your attitude that they felt was not satisfactory to what they're seeing. Once you're in jail, the number one support system that you have is your parole officer. So it's in your best interest to have a very good relationship with them and tell them the truth to some extent. Tell them the truth that they want to hear. You're also going to want to stay out of trouble leading up to your parole. The fact of the matter is, though, you only really need to stay out of trouble for the last 6 months before you go up in front of the parole board. I've seen guys on very long sentences act like knuckleheads for 24 and a half years, only to get their shit together in the last 6 months, and guess what? Oftentimes, it works out. What does that mean? It means you're staying out of violent situations, staying out of the subculture of drug use, and if you do have a urinalysis test, you're coming up clean. Urinalysis tests are supposedly random, but I knew some guys who got tested 3 times over the course of 4 months in jail, and then there's individuals like me who were there for almost 3 years and got drug analyzed. Not that they would have found anything. If you do all that, you will have the support of your parole officer when you go up for parole. That's very important. That's not to say that you can't get parole without the support of your parole officer, but it becomes a little trickier. You're also going to need community support. Now, most of the time, when you get day parole, you have to be released into a halfway house. That means that not only does the halfway house have to look at your file and accept you, but it means that the local police in the town that you're being released to have to support the fact that you're going to be coming to that town because they have to keep tabs on you, or at least pretend to keep tabs on you. There was one guy I knew who didn't get community support because his crime involved an altercation with a police officer in the same town that he was being released to. The police said, "We do not want any part of this drama," and denied him community support, but he still had the support of his parole officer and a halfway house, so he was able to get out anyway. It's all on a case-by-case basis, and there's no hard and fast math involved in this. Depending on how much time you get in your sentence, you might not actually be able to complete your program in the time you have. For example, if you get a 2-year plus a day sentence and your program takes 6 months to finish, you might be asked to finish the rest of it on road or in the community. If that's the case, thank your lucky stars, because it means you get to go home, but still go to a meeting once a week to talk about consequences and your feelings. Think of it kind of like an AA program, but specifically regarding your risks. If your parole officer inside supports you and the community supports you, you're almost guaranteed to get parole. Now, the one case that I have seen multiple people not get parole in this circumstance, even though they're in a minimum security facility, is people who are in jail for drinking and driving, causing bodily harm, mostly death. The most famous case is Marco Muzzo, who got denied parole his first time, but I've seen multiple lower profile guys also get denied for the exact same reason, because they weren't sorry enough. If you do get denied parole, you have to wait 1 full year in order to apply again. But it's also important to remember that your dates are your dates. And if that 1 year takes place after your 2/3 of a sentence is used up, then you're going home at your 2/3 anyway. You can apply for parole at the 1/3 mark of your sentence. But at the 2/3 mark of your sentence, that's your statutory release date. And unless you're a lifer, you are getting out on your 2/3. There's people who wait until they're 2/3 and don't even bother going for parole. Those people are called stat cases. Some people prefer being stat cases because they get to maintain their reputation on the inside. But if your main goal is to go home, you should definitely be trying to get day parole. Quick fact, there's something called day parole other, where you don't get released to a halfway house, but you get to go straight home. This was introduced under COVID, but from my understanding, people are still getting day parole other in federal facilities. All this means is that the parole officer comes to your house that you plan on being released to, does a quick check to make sure there's nothing crazy going on in that house, and supports you to be able to go straight home and not stay in a halfway house for 6 months. I was in a halfway house for 6 months myself, but I can tell you that outside of it being just an annoying inconvenience, there's nothing that bad about it. You're still outside and free, more or less. You just have a very strict curfew for about 6 months. So like I said, your dates are your dates. Once you find yourself inside, you're going to get a big piece of paper, and it's going to have all of your dates plus the math that they use to get to them. That date that is titled DPE is for your day parole eligibility. So 4 to 5 months before that date, you want to put in a request for parole. One thing about being a prisoner in Canada is you're going to have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of forms that have to be filled out in triplicate and put in a mailbox, and you better hope that they don't get lost. So let's say you did everything you had to, you have community support, you have the parole officer's support, and today's your big day. My number one advice to you when you're in front of the parole board is to be as sorry as possible. Throw yourself on the sword, talk about all the bad things that you've done and how much of a piece of shit you used to be before you got to jail. Jail, it changed me. I don't know what I would have done without it. You know, if it wasn't for this place, I might have died. Or worse. You're gonna want to go through your crime in as much detail as possible and talk about not just what happened leading up to the crime itself, but all the things that were happening in your personality that caused you to take that step of committing the crime. There was one guy that I knew in minimum security. He was there for a DUI, causing bodily harm. Unfortunately, somebody died. And he talked about how he was very sorry for the incident. Parole Board asked him, well, how many times had you drank and drive leading up to that moment? And he said about 6 or 7 times, maybe. And the Parole Board asks, well, do you think that you were taking a risk with people's lives at that time? And why do you think that was okay? And he thought about it and he said, no, I don't think I was taking a risk with people's lives. I think it was a bad decision, but sorry, denied. For the most part, everybody does get out under a liberal government. So if you find yourself going to jail while Trudeau is still in power, count your lucky stars. And we'll see what happens next in the Canadian elections. But from the way that I was told stories by lifers, it's impossible to get out on anything other than your stat under a conservative government. Personally, when I went up, I told them that I regretted what I did, and not only did I introduce cocaine to the community of Australia, but I also helped facilitate an illegal drug trade in South America just by virtue of working with international drug cartel. But when they asked me whether or not I felt like jail was an overwhelmingly positive thing, I, in typical positive fashion, said, yeah, you know what, this was a good thing for me and I'm happy it happened. They didn't like that, and they found that my ego was rather enlarged because of it. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. It's up for them to decide, and they made the decision to give me day parole, but not full parole, which is actually pretty common, but the way it was described in the news made it sound like I was denied full parole and had to spend more time in jail. So there you have it. Going up for parole is going to be the most important part of your criminal justice journey. Yes, going to jail is terrible, but if you land in minimum security, you can definitely make the most of your time. But it's important that even though there's a silver lining in you going to jail, you only present the worst parts of it to the parole board. Who's on the parole board, you may ask? Well, there's a series of volunteers, so you'll find people in social services and people who genuinely do want to make the community a better place. But you'll also find a lot of retired cops on there. They can be a little bit difficult to work with because they see things through the lens of, this is a criminal who is making society a worse place. Whereas the social services people will see you as an individual who may have made a mistake. There is no way you can dictate who's on the parole board when it's your time to go up in front of them, so it really does just come down to chance. Also, under COVID, all of this parole board proceedings actually happens on a Zoom or a WebEx call or something in a boardroom, but there are times when you will have to sit in front of them. All parole hearings are held during the middle 2 weeks of the month. So keep that in mind if your date is at the start of the month or at the end of the month. Let's say your date is the first week of June. That is the day that you are eligible to go home. Some people will opt to have their parole in May, get the decision, and then wait 2 weeks in jail knowing that they're free to go once their date hits. Others will wait until the middle of June, and then the second that they get parole, they're out of there. It's up to you. And it really depends on how you want to treat your mental health when you're in jail. I know some people agonize over the idea of knowing that they're free to go, but they just have to run the clock down. It's up to you. So that's it. That's how you get parole in Canada from my experience. If you like what you saw, be sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. I'm also putting a link in the description to the blog posts that I made while I was in jail, plus my Ethereum address if you're feeling tippy. Of course, I'll link to the book itself. Once again, it's been Slava P with another prison story. Let me know what you think. You know where to find me. Bye-bye.